yeah, it's all really easy I grew up in the world of knowing about the British cycling guys and leaving no stone unturned. And I quickly realized that I could be kind of running around at the bottom of the beach, looking under every single little pebble. And I was in danger of missing the great big boulders at the top of the beach that effectively go out and do lots of training and do it over many weeks and recover well between it. And that gets you 99% of the way there. So, yeah, I mean, it has, but to answer the question and not be a politician, it has definitely changed to probably, in some ways, slightly more of a pyramidal kind of system, or it has at times. I'd say I still, in my core training, if we're very roughly sticking to 80% of the same, that 80% is a very kind of polarized model.
Here we are, Alistair. Super pumped to be able to speak to you. You are really you're the first person that we're interviewing on the Training Science podcast, other than Martin and I. So again, very special. We are honored that you are here with us. Yeah, so I guess we'll crack straight into it. And you're obviously a really seasoned athlete. And you're actually quite young. Like you're only 33, isn't that right?
Yeah. Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me. Yeah. I mean, I guess I am quite young. I joke with my friends that I've had a hard paper round training pretty seriously for endurance sports since I was about 14. So I don't always feel very young, especially in the morning. But yeah, I guess I am.
Well, because that's the first important point, I think, is that you, despite being relatively young for a seasoned veteran endurance athlete with your credentials, I know that you have a long training age, because we all, back to my work with the New Zealand program, we always would, we would do these graphs of training age versus performance ultimately. And the reason why we actually did it is because we could actually, when you graph these performance times with training age, you could actually see clear outliers that we might, we were sort of almost like potentially detectable for doping. If I'm open and honest, is sort of what we're looking at. You looked pretty solid. You've got this beautiful curve, but I think you were back. You said 14. I thought you were back you were almost starting around 11 or something. But yeah, you've been in for a while, haven't you?
I guess it depends when you define how you define training, and like so many things in sport, the devil is in the detail, isn't it? And yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure how I'd define that. But yeah, I was swimming pretty seriously, probably from being an 8 or 9 year old. But by the time I was kind of 11, 12, I was running quite a bit, I'd say. And probably triathlon training from probably 14, something like that. I'm not entirely sure. I think I probably started to have a really solid structure. I started cycling to school. Basically, I was just thinking of ways to get in aerobic training, and I hated time waste of sat on the bus, and lived about kind of 10 or 15 miles away from the school that I was going to, which there's a great canal towpath, which I still run up and down all the time now, actually. And I thought, I could just cycle up there in the morning, and that became my routine. And I think at that point, that's probably in my mind when I'm like, yeah, at that point I had a consistent training routine that I was doing week in, week out, and started to develop the routine that I've actually mostly stuck with right now. I mean, that kind of training routine, kind of all kind of artifacts, things like I had an afternoon off school, Wednesday afternoon, and so I was like, that's when I can do a long ride. And that stuck with me now. And actually, most of the British program follow these kind of artifacts. Same thing to being able, first time I happened to walk down the track on a Tuesday night. That's why I've always done track on a Tuesday night. First started, came across the local chain gang on a Thursday night by chance, hard ride on a Thursday. So it's funny how things develop. And that was literally it, me making it up as I went along.
Yeah, sometimes that's the best way. Maybe there's just this this flow of things that and trial and error that we know that despite the science that we all like to profess, there's a lot of just happen chance and figuring things out as you go along and experimenting as you go and figuring out what works. So that is super cool. So I think you bring up a really important point with consistency of training. I think that's got to be one of the first and foremost important things. I mean, think again, you're talking back 9, 11, 14 years of age, but then consistently training throughout your career. And would you say that that is one of the key points for success and something that a young and aspiring athlete should try to achieve?
Yeah, I think consistency is key. I mean, when people always ask me advice, definitely one of the top 3 questions I get asked is, what should I do with training? How should I do it? Et cetera, et cetera. And I always say, sorry, this is really boring, but be consistent over a long period of time and do that week in, week out, and don't expect progress to happen overnight. And I think that is definitely the case with endurance sport. I think the other thing that goes with consistency is I kind of always had this feeling that, volume is important, but volume at really low intensity allows you to do your really high intensity stuff at real high intensity. So that combination of that, and I can't really say at the time as a 14, 15-year-old, that really came from any science, although my dad actually bought me a sports physiology book when I was about 15 and said, read this. So I did kind of have a bit of a background and an understanding, but it actually more came from kind of philosophies. At the time, I was training with swimming clubs and cycling with cyclists and running with runners, and it was basically like, I don't know whether it was from where I grew up, but just do lots of it. And then when you go hard, just go really hard. And it seemed completely at odds to me at the time of the kind of triathlon training that I was exposed to through, I guess, the kind of program and coaches and stuff that actually know you want to maximize your 1500 meter pace and 200 meter swim pace. And I remember thinking really young, well, it's kind of irrelevant how fast I can run 1500 meters. What's really relevant is how fast I can run 1500 meters after a 1500 meter swim, a 40k bike, an 8.5k of run, and to get there effectively, I need to be aerobically, how I saw at the time, efficient, and I get that from lots of relatively low intensity volume training and some very high intensity training, and that was kind of the in and out of the philosophy.
I'm shaking my head because it's just like, it's taken me a career to really appreciate the polarized training model. And then somehow at a very young age, maybe through the physiology book that you're reading or just, coming across with the right people, but you were basically doing that. And of course it worked for you as well. Right. So I think there's others that would claim that's not the model that works for them, but clearly this was a model that worked very well for you. So I'm not claiming
it was necessarily by design. There was definitely a fair bit of luck there, and some stubbornness, I think, on my part, which was a good thing, and and some coming across some key people who kind of encouraged me on that route. Swimming coaches, a kind of teacher at school, who I did a lot of my early running with, and Malk, the coach, who I met to start doing track sessions and running sessions when I was about 14 as well. I was actually probably training pretty serious at that point. And he was like, you come to the track to run fast, and you only run fast on the track. And the days that I turned up and that I was just too knackered to run around the track effectively, he would say, well, why are you too tired? You've got to make sure you protect this session. And when you come to the track, to run fast. So I think that really helped to shape my philosophy of, protect the hard sessions and be able to do that intensity when you need to do it. But outside that, do as much as you possibly effectively can, while you can still do the hard stuff hard.
That's cool. I was wondering, are there any, internal signals that you became good at, I don't know, monitoring yourself in terms of like allowing yourself to reach that consistency? Like you must have been good at listening to the body somehow to know, because we all, even though you're doing things by the model perfectly, nothing runs perfect, right? Like situations happen, and the plan's got to change. So how did you go about, I don't know, grabbing wisdom at a young age to be able to do that?
Well, I obviously definitely didn't get it right. I think I'm quite lucky in that, probably looking back on it, I could handle that, call it internal load, really well. And I remember thinking, I'm actually training and I'm tired. What I've got to do is adapt to this amount of training. And then this amount of training will allow me to be okay with it. And then I can move on to the next amount of training. And it's constantly training to train. Not taking time off. I've got to adapt to this amount of training before I can do more. And so like that in physiological load, I think I'm kind of lucky. I could handle, I didn't really get ill. I've never believed in overtraining. I could throw anything at, well, especially as in my 20s, could throw any amount of training at myself. But physically, obviously crossed that line a fair bit. And that's what I struggled with more than anything. I think it's particularly training for Olympic distance triathlon, where I was trying to do big hours and big volume of training, and at the same time combining that with the really high intensity stuff, trying to run a 28-minute 10K, or be in a shape to do that. I think that that was the thing that really was my kind of restrictor, as it were, the dealing with that, the fatigue at the same time as running really quick, and the physical biomechanical load that put through my system.
So what age range were you doing that kind of phase in your career at?
Probably, it kind of stepped up. So probably really training consistently as a 16-year-old, and then by the time I'm 18, training a bit more. By the time I'm 20, a bit more. Probably really my kind of peak training years between 22 onwards, when I could really do kind of big volume, really high intensity stuff, and through that period. I think that the other reason is I always really believed in sleep. So I kind of think that I've described it in lots of ways, but people talk about recovery, and I think sleep's 90% of it, nutrition's the other 9%, and everything else is 1%, or whatever figures you put on it. But yeah, basically sleep is by far the most important thing, and nutrition is very important as well. But if you get sleep right, you can. I felt at the time I could get away with all sorts, and that meant sleeping well every night, and quite often sleeping an hour or two in the day when I was really pushing it. And I think that was a really key thing for me.
Yeah. No, sleep is fascinating, and we're obviously learning more and more about it, and listening to various different podcasts. And Walker, I think is his last name, is doing lots on it. So what are your general tips you can give people for maximizing sleep? What are the general things you kind of try to set up to enable that?
Yeah, well, I think for me, it is definitely a factor of how tired you are. I think your body kind of naturally knows in lots of ways how much sleep you need. And so, don't get too stressed if you're not sleeping. Maybe you don't need it. As soon as I stop training, I actually don't really need that anywhere near as much sleep. So I think be tired, don't be stressed about it. And then, like so many other things in life, it's the really boring things we all know already. Be relaxed before bed. Try and read stuff. Don't look at screens. I'm kind of funny with stuff. I always leave my phone outside my bedroom. Try not spend time on my phone after a certain time at night. Really cold room. I live in a really cold, dark, really quiet place, which is a bit of a nightmare, because anytime I go anywhere else, it's more noisy, warmer, and lighter. So yeah, boring things that we all know. And yeah, not eating things that are high in sugar, I think, and not drinking too much have a big effect on my sleep as well, for sure.
Yeah, nice. So, yeah, maybe talk to us. This is the Training Science Podcast, so we really want to know, how you think about training and performance. Obviously, you've been through this phase in your life where the sprint and Olympic, world triathlon series, was captivating to you, and you dominated that. So obviously, you're now in a phase where you've got your sort of your eyes set on Ironman 70.3 Worlds, and of course the Sub 7 project as well that we'll talk about. So how does your approach to performance and training, what approach do you take, and has it changed in recent years?
So I think it's quite hard to sum up an approach, but in general, I just like to stand on the start line of my main goal, knowing that I've done everything I can in my power to be there in the best possible position I can be in, and then the rest looks after it myself. And I think that kind of covers off the performance basics of, do everything you can, do the right training, train as hard as you can, but as smart as you can, do the rest. All these things that are bordering on cliches, like you only really improve and adapt during rest and recovery, and getting all the little bits right, and all those things really important. So when I stand on the start line, you've done everything you can do. And of course that encompasses as well, like physically training hard and training as well as you can, which means that using the combination of really, science to maximize that, and understanding that, not at the same time, not getting too bogged down in the details, and ultimately knowing that it's the training like we said before, and consistent training over a period of time, sticking to relatively basic principles of, for me, polarized training, progressive overloading, and consistent over months that makes a difference. And I think that's probably it in a nutshell. How has it changed from Olympic distance racing to long distance racing? I don't feel like I've had necessarily had a really good run, or the kind of run I'd like at long distance racing. So I'm really looking forward to getting a chance to do that. And it's good at the moment because my body is in a great place, and I've actually had one of the benefits of basically calling on a season last year is that I feel like I've had a long, slow winter of training, just getting that base going again, getting the body kind of fit, healthy, and strong. And now I'm kind of in a place where I can push and do a little bit more. So that's really good. And how's that changed for long distance? I think there's the obvious. I mean, I think ultimately it's they're endurance sports. It actually doesn't matter whether it's a 50-minute race or an 8-hour race. It is an endurance sport, and that makes 80% of your training relatively similar. I think for Ironman, there's the obvious differences, and for long distance racing, where the time trialing on the bike becomes really important. So that's your time trial position, racing in that position, being as aerodynamic as you can, really important. Constant power output rather than that kind of staccato up and down power output, which I trained for short distance racing, and then leg resilience to be able to run a marathon, which is different to running a 10K. And the big one, nutrition. Over Olympic distance, you can pretty much get away and not really worry about nutrition. It's a few percent over an Ironman. You definitely can't not worry about nutrition. As I've kind of found out, it goes very wrong very quickly. I think they're the big ones, and that spins out loads of other interesting points about then how you train and prepare for those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So back to your history and whatnot is the polarized training, And, obviously we know that that's super successful for Olympic distance and sprint distance triathlon, the shorter duration ones. Has the, do you monitor to know if you're sort of shifting that polarized model to become more pyramidal, say, for example, because of the longer periods of work that you must do on the bike and run?
I don't actually monitor that much. One of my kind of rules of training is I'm a massive believer in science and scientific principles and logic, and doing things in a logical way. But I've kind of also fundamentally, seen so much come and go in sport. I feel that I've kind of always had this rule that if I collect some kind of data tomorrow and it doesn't ultimately affect what I collect some kind of data today and it doesn't ultimately affect what I do tomorrow, then I stop collecting it, because there's no point collecting it. And the other thing is that I've kind of always been kind of aware and used this analogy too many times, so I apologize to everyone that's heard it all before, but it's all really easy to, I grew up in the world of knowing about the British cycling guys and leaving no stone unturned, and I quickly realized that I could be kind of running around at the bottom of the beach, looking under every single little pebble, and I was in danger of missing the great big boulders at the top of the beach that effectively go out and do lots of training and do it over many weeks and recover well between it, and that gets you 99% of the way there. So yeah, I mean, it has, but to answer the question and not be a politician, it has definitely changed to probably in some ways slightly more of a pyramidal kind of system, or it has at times. I'd say I still, in my core training, if we're very roughly sticking to 80% of the same, that 80% is a very kind of polarized model, and then I do probably look at doing pyramidal specifics. And I think you have to for Ironman. If you think of Ironman and 70.3 at that half distance, that I think is actually the hardest thing to train for in lots of ways. If you look at that and you want to spend time around your race pace, if you think that's important, I believe it's important to train specifically your metabolism at those efforts more than anything else, and for running to train your body to kind of cope with a load at those kind of speeds. You are ultimately going to more of a pyramid model because those intensities and speeds don't fit in very hard or very easy categories.
Yep, fantastic. Yeah, I would. Yeah, sounds wise. Makes sense. The next question for you, maybe, and you kind of alluded to it, but can you talk about some of the hard lessons that you've learned along the way that have allowed you, especially as you transition from your Olympic distance forte to now more long distance kind of work? What are some of the hard lessons that you learned? You mentioned nutrition, say, for example. Any good stories, horror stories potentially that you could allude to there for us?
Yeah, well, nutrition is evidently really important, and spending time really focusing on that, I think, is key. I think in lots of ways, long distance racing is more been really focused on the detail, and by that detail I mean being really specific about nutrition and what you're ingesting and when, really specific about things like your bike, having a couple of watts difference in your chain set friction or your aerodynamics of your front end, or these things do add up, and ultimately over 180k on your own, it does make a significant difference. So it's choosing the right pebbles to look under, and I think in lots of ways that's actually more important at long distance. It definitely is more important at long distance than it is at short distance. And there's some great people doing work across all kinds of different disciplines. So what lessons did I learn? I think did an Ironman to qualify for Kona, and I actually got around it pretty easy. I didn't prepare for it at all. It was really cold weather, and I was just kind of jogging around the run, and I'd kind of got nutrition wrong at points and could get to the next aid station and, you know, have a couple of bananas and some Coke, and then 10 minutes later I'd be fine, and keep doing that. I definitely didn't nail down my nutrition so much then when I raced my second Ironman, which was at Kona. And that was catastrophic. I just wasn't ever getting back to that place, amazingly, because I've never had that before in my life. You know, I can eat and seem to ingest and metabolize things really quick, but yeah, I was just not. And so it was without a doubt the worst hour trying to get around it that I've ever had in sport ever, which is saying something. You know, I've had quite a lot of sporting experiences, and that was horrific.
Was that 2019?
Yeah, I've only done it once.
I was out watching you in the lava fields. You didn't look good, mate.
No, well, tell me, I felt worse than I looked, honestly. And so that was obviously a big learning curve. And I kind of woke up the morning after that. I was like, yeah, I can do better than that. I know I can do better. I knew I was in really good shape. And why? And so I went away, and it was about making the nutrition super binary. Actually, you know, not really changing the carbs that I was intaking. I knew that already, but what I really needed was to get it right. I'm going to make this really easy. You know, all I need to do is sip away at this sauce every 10 to 15 minutes, and I'm going to get in what I need, you know, rather than thinking I need this now and this. And I think that's something else to say in long distance racing. There is quite a lot to do and decisions to make that aren't, you know, technical or tactical decisions. They are technical but not tactical. And making those decisions and the brain processing as easy as possible, I think, is something that I think is quite important to me.
Yeah, really well said. Couldn't agree more. Maybe to shift to, you know, what's the stuff that science has taught you? We're the Training Science podcast. So, yeah, what is, yeah, I kind of almost want to go, what's science taught you, but maybe what's something that, despite the evidence, of the scientific evidence, that you don't do?
So science, in some ways, like I've already said, that my training methods came from happy design. So, or random design at least. And in lots of ways, you know, when I started reading the stuff that came out in I think late 2000s, early 2010, when the Stephen Silas stuff about polarized training and that kind of thing, you know, kind of validating that process, that was good. And more recently, I've definitely become aware that as I've got older, I have to kind of fight more and work more for that top end, which again, you know, is kind of validated by the science, losing kind of VO2 ability as you get older. And so I've kind of, I guess, turned to science more of how to train and work for that VO2. I guess another physiology example is really looking for the kind of fat max concept, and, you know, obviously a big limiter in Ironman and long distance triathlon is your carbohydrate metabolism. If you can protect your endogenous carbohydrates and maximize your endogenous carbohydrate intake and metabolism and also maximize the output of which you can metabolize fat still. Obviously, that's an advantage. So kind of looking to science of how to develop that. I've been doing quite a lot of work over the 6 months on my exogenous fuel intake. Actually, what combination of carbs and various other things actually really maximize that, and is the ways, means, you know, liquids, whatever, that mean that I can absorb and metabolize that better than others. And so I've been doing a bit of testing on that, which has been really interesting. I've kind of, could we skate over all of the the science around, let's call it the kind of more biomechanical science of aerodynamics, bike position, looking at the fastest trainers, which is something I've been doing for sub 7 and wetsuits and that kind of thing, which is kind of sparked all kinds of interesting projects, which has been really interesting. What science, despite the evidence, I think, like I said before, there's loads of stuff that, well, firstly, I'm aware of that there is evidence. I do think, in general, we have to be kind of careful of evidence in terms of science and sports science, not to diss you, as I know you published a lot and as an exercise physiologist. But I think I've heard you use and talk about context, and I think that is the most important thing about using sports science. Context of, is this right for the athlete? And I know we can profile athletes and do this and that. And I think, like I said, profiling, recording data, analyzing it, they're all the easy bits. The difficult bit is working out how to make the adjustments that you need to do. Do you need to increase someone's fat max or VO2 or thresholds or whatever? And I kind of still feel that there isn't necessarily a lot of validity in some of the stuff around that. And I guess so that's the first contextual point. The second contextual point is the statistical points about the power of the studies, massive, relatively low sample numbers, big ranges, not done with elite athletes. And I think learning to contextualize that and understand it, that of course is not saying that you should discard it. It's just saying that you should be able to contextualize it and use it appropriately, but ultimately understand that you are doing a n=1 scientific experiment with an athlete, and learning as you go along what works for them and trying to track it, I think, is ultimately much more valuable than saying, this study showed a 25% increase in hematocrit by people that go to altitude and do X, Y, Z. Well, yeah, that 25% is an average, etc., etc. We won't get bogged down in statistics. So I always keep that in mind. That I think that one of the big things that I haven't, that there is some evidence for, that I've experimented with a little bit, and I'd like to experiment with more and understand more. I mean, I kind of really fascinated by and understand a little bit about heart rate variability and the role that does and can play. I'm really aware of studies that use it for prescription of exercise on certain days. So, yeah, if your heart rate variability looks good, you can get the best adaptation from doing a particular session when you're most ready for it. Yeah, get that, makes sense. And I'm also aware of its ability to detect the first ventilatory thresholds and look at that. But yeah, it's something that I've not experimented with.
Yes, it's definitely one for the future. Loads of potential. I mean, many listeners to this would argue it's here now and already useful. I think it's, again, context when you know how to use it and you've got a good background of data on an individual, and then it's great. You need to be careful that you're not making knee-jerk reactions to certain data points that you might be receiving, I think. So back to science, and you alluded to it. Let's talk about this, your Sub 7 project. Just tell us all about it. How did it even come about, or what is it, and how did it come about?
Yeah, the Sub 7 project came about from a bunch of us sat around, actually, just after the famous Ineos 159 project. And we're thinking, what would be a really cool kind of challenge that would push the boat out for triathlon. And I said, well, what about Sub 7 Ironman? And kind of loads of people said, is that possible? I said, I don't know, but I'll kind of go away and do some sums and see if it is. And I kind of realized quite quickly that it was possible, but it was really on the edge of what is possible, and would need certain things around it to make it possible without having too many factors around it. So swim down a river, cycle downhill behind a bus, and run downhill, and obviously you could probably go for sub 6 hours, but that's kind of pointless. So making the kind of interesting factors that for me still have the validity around the event, make it really interesting as a project for me as an athlete, and looking at the science of it to maximize all of that to go sub 7, and that's where it came from. And the idea of hopefully telling the story of overcoming those challenges and what we need to do to overcome those challenges, and ultimately what it takes to hopefully be successful on the day. So it's going to happen this summer. It's a race where there's 2 of us, Christian Blumenfeld and me as the men, trying to go sub 7. We each have our own team of 10 people we can use how we wish. 2 women, and Lucy Charles and Nicholas Birrig, trying to go sub 8, all on the same day. It's going to be in this summer, hopefully on the perfect course in the perfect weather conditions, and using team and various technology to really go as fast as we can.
Oh, super cool. We see the success of the Sub 2 project, right? So it's a logical step for us in the sport of triathlon, and I'm so stoked that you guys are doing this. Can you tell me just briefly about some of the, swim, bike, run? What are some of the cool projects even that you're looking at? Because think of all the things that we got from the Sub 2 project, right? With the shoes and it is a scientific endeavor that really gets you thinking about how we can go faster. Talk to us about some of the things you might be looking at.
It's an absolutely fascinating scientific endeavor. On swim, what's the maximum, what's the fastest wetsuit? Started off that process already, gone through a couple of iterations, literally started with me with a wetsuit on, putting various other bits of wetsuit on just to see what would happen. It's a great example. Anecdotally, you think, if I just put on extra mils of neoprene on my upper body, obviously I'm going to float. I'll be like a surfboard. I go faster. It turns out that you can't swim, even if you don't put it on your arms. You put more and more neoprene on your body, you just don't have that movement in your body, which actually is quite important. So learning interesting things like that, and that's ongoing. And then you think, well, how actually do I test this validity, in a valid way? So I know this wetsuit is going to be faster for this race on this day in the conditions. Well, actually, you don't even want it to be faster. You just want to, if you think about it, all I want is efficiency, especially on the swim. I want to be able to go at a certain speed for a lower effort oxygen consumption. So. How do I do that? On the bike, the obvious one is aerodynamics. That comes from 2 places. My CDA, so reducing that is an obvious one, and the CDA reduction you get from drafting. So who can you get to ride? How hard do they need to ride on the front? What does that reduction look like? Is it better with, what's the difference between 2, 4 and 6 people? Is it better with people in different orders? What is the disadvantage of changing people in front of you? And all those kind of things, which is something that we've looked at already and was really interesting. Run, again, what's the benefit of having people in front of you for a draft effect? Is there a benefit? Are those people better used in other places? What is the trainer benefit? And can you test that with validity? And across all those, back to the nutrition, which is why when I talked earlier about the exogenous carbohydrate and really maximizing that is a big thing, which is obviously great for sub 7 and obviously great for long distance racing in general. So that's something that's been ongoing for 6 months now.
That's just amazing. Who are some of the partners on the commercial partners that you guys have on board so far, helping you out?
Well, for me, it's my personal sponsors, which are all fantastic. So, been doing loads of work for with Who on the wetsuit front, and they're a long-term commercial partner. Adidas on the shoe front, so that's fantastic. Actually, it depends when this goes out because I'm just changing bike sponsor. But I'll let you know later.
No problem.
But yeah, I'll say it anyway. And I've got a new bike sponsor in BMC, which obviously make incredibly fast bikes, and I'm going through the process and iteration of really maximizing my aerodynamics on that bike with them, and maximizing the front end aerodynamics. So that's something that I'm really enjoying, and again is something that's good for long distance triathlon racing in general.
Awesome. Super exciting. Well, I think I don't want to take too much of your time, but we can't leave without making this announcement. And obviously, we have to also announce that we're so excited to have you join us with Athletica as a full-fledged team member. And with so many opportunities out there, this is a really big call on your part. So we're just absolutely honored. And maybe tell us a little bit of the story about how you came to even find out about us with HIIT Science.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me. I think to tell the story quickly about how I came involved, we got introduced by a mutual friend, acquaintance, a guy called Cedric, who works at the local university and was a strength conditioning coach, or always around the gym as an intern or something, but seems to do everything. The two of the other guys I train with call Cedric the Oracle because he just seemed to know everything about everything. Anyway, we got introduced, and he said, "Oh, we should chat." And I knew nothing about Athletica, but generally know about HIIT Science and the research and your background and stuff. So that's cool. And then we were chatting about various things, and you mentioned Athletica, and I kind of involved in a number of sports tech businesses, kind of investing and advising all kinds of things. And I kind of been aware for a long time, like I alluded to very briefly earlier, that for sure, recording, analyzing, storing data is kind of been done, and the easy bit. The really interesting bit is maximizing our ability, machine ability to predict and prescribe using that data. And I kind of felt that this is a job, firstly, that's really important and needs to be done by machines, because there's so much data that we're all collecting now. The easy bit is collecting it, the difficult bit is analyzing it and using it to prescribe information. And at the same time, that there's so much science out there, and science that is getting more valid, and some really kind of rock solid principles that can be used. And I think that there was a really good chance to do it. I felt I've obviously seen a few of these businesses over the years, and people trying to do it. There are a few people out there trying to do it, not being completely convinced by things for business models. Always felt that it was really important that there was genuine scientific experts really backing up in there. And obviously then there's the programming part that I can't ever say I understand in any shape or form, but I try to understand, and I've done quite a lot of reading about the AI and stuff. So that's interesting. And then I think there's two things really about Athletica that I liked. One was, apart from what I've already said, one was this, the whole point about how do we integrate people and coaches? Because I felt, from my experience in career, that really the key, there's so many things about coaching that are so important, and a massive part of that is human relationships. And that's for a whole host of reasons that maybe we can talk about on another podcast. But I think those human relationships can be maximized, and coaching can be maximized by providing really good prescriptive advice, guidance, however you want to define it, to coaches, which gives the maximum experience to the athlete, and working on that interface between machine prediction and coaching, I thought it's just a fascinating thing to do. And so to be offered the chance to shape that in some small way and work with you guys on that was something that really excited me. So yeah, that's why I decided to join the fun.
Fantastic. Well, we're again so grateful to have you on board, and you're assisting us from the business standpoint and the product standpoint as well. And yeah, I think, a really important thing, something we always come back to, a thing we spoke about in the first 3 podcasts was it's all about, appreciating and knowing your context. And sometimes, like, again, why we want to build a coach version here, why that's in progress, is that we think that, a lot of this info that's, we've spent a career building with HIIT Science, if it's actually programmed and put in using the machines, and machines are helping us with the variables that are coming back through the wearables to tell us where we should sort of be at on a given day, the coach can kind of help and guide that whole context, and the athlete can also guide that context too. But and of course we can work in synergy ultimately, and that's what we're sort of aiming to do with Athletica. Yeah, and it almost kind of goes back to your track session. What are you going to do? Malcolm's not going to always be there for you, right? So it's like, what does the science, or what actually say that session can be on your Tuesday night? And maybe it's a little bit different than you might expect, but here it is, sort of in front of you. Here's a great little load, and then make sure that, the coach is there to help the athlete guide, and pull back as needed, and make sure that they're listening to the body too.
Yeah, I think obviously we're going to be talking about this a lot more, and trying to dissect exactly what that interface looks like and how we can maximize it. And I think there's 2 things that really quickly come to mind. I think the first thing is, yeah, for sure, there is a load of the intangibles out there that a computer, whatever, can't do yet. There's things on the line that a computer might be able to do, recognize that the ground conditions aren't right, that the temperature's wrong, that I don't know, that the athlete has a limp and isn't walking right. All these things, we might get there one day. I'm not convinced. I think the human eye, I hope, has still got the edge on that. And then there's the empathy and delivery and those things, I think, that are key, really key for coaching. When I reflect on my experience of good coaches, I like to tell a story a lot of Jack Maitland, my other long-term coach, telling me a few times when I was young and, probably training a bit too hard at times and coming to swim sessions and just saying, "Oh, I'm tired." And I remember him telling me, I always found, fatigue is just a function of how long it takes you to warm up. I get on with it and you'll warm up and get into it. And I don't think we'll be in a position where some software can tell us that for a while. And I think the other thing is I've truly believed, and I really kind of cemented this belief from writing the book I wrote recently, in the power of conviction in what you're doing. This self-fulfilling kind of prophecy cycle of, the more you believe what you're doing is right, the more likely it is to succeed, for all kinds of psychological reasons, I imagine, but principally because if you believe it's going to work, you tend to do it better, so it does work. And simply, and I think that conviction, that sense of conviction, I think if it's rooted in great human relationships and decision making, and on the ground everyday decision making, backed up by the best kind of physiological advice and prescription and scientific, coming from a scientific place that can be offered, I think that's as good as it can get.
Yeah, it's a pretty good recipe for success. Absolutely. Yeah. Brilliant, Alistair. I don't know where can, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So where can people learn more about you?
Well, if you still want to learn more after listening to this, I've got Twitter and Instagram and stuff. And yeah, I recently wrote a book called Relentless, The Secrets of the Sporting Success. So maybe buy that. I think it's quite interesting.
How can they get a hold of the book? And who's publishing it?
To the international audience, it's published by HarperCollins, and I'm pretty sure you can buy it on Amazon almost everywhere. And normally to a British audience, I say it's available in all good bookstores. I don't know if that applies in the rest of the world, but hopefully it does.
We'll be sure to include a link on the show notes. So that's fantastic. I wasn't aware that you published a book. Congratulations. Martin and I know what's involved with that, so it's not an easy journey.
Not quite as highbrow as your book, so I think it probably took me a little bit less time. But yeah, even so, a lot of time and effort went into it.
Well, mate, you've given us so much insight into training science, into context, and so much inspiration as well. Huge congrats on a career to date, and but it's not over yet, right? You're now in the 30s, so you still got a lot more work to do, a lot more accomplishments to go for. So again, we're grateful to have you on board with Athletica, and wishing you all the best with the Sub 7 project. Hopefully we'll have you back on for a few more of these in the future to kind of bring us up to speed on how you're going.
Great. Thanks very much. Speak soon.
Thanks, Alistair. Cheers.